Welcome back to Boring History for Sleep. Tonight we'll be traveling far back into the frost-bitten quiet of the northern plains, before highways, before cities, even before maps marked the heart of the continent. Our journey takes us to a winter camp, nestled against the wind, wrapped in buffalo hides where life moved slowly, and survival meant understanding the cold, the rhythms of the earth, and the meaning of community. But don't worry, your place in the present is warm and soft. You're not out there, not really. Before we begin, take a moment to settle in. Maybe you're tucked under the covers already, lights dimmed, phone gently charging by your side. Or maybe you're just listening in the background, letting your thoughts wander as the day winds down. Wherever you are, on the couch, on a long overnight shift, or lying quietly in bed, I'm glad you're here. And if you find yourself enjoying this journey through time, consider liking or subscribing. It helps this small campfire of ours stay lit. Now, are you ready? Close your eyes if you like. Let the quiet begin to take hold. We're heading into snow-covered prairie now, into a season of endurance and tradition. Let's begin. Imagine it's morning, but not the kind of morning you know. There's no hum of traffic, no electric heater warming the room, no glow of a screen, just the pale light of a sun rising slowly over snow-swept grasslands, and the whisper of smoke curling from the low opening of a buffalo hide lodge. You're curled beneath thick furs. The air in the lodge is smoky but cold. Not the kind of cold that bites sharply, but the kind that lingers around the edges, that settles into your breath and bones. The fire in the center of the lodge has burned low during the night. You can feel it, your fingers are stiff. Your nose catches the scent of embers, charred wood, the faint richness of tanned hide. All around you others begin to stir. The rhythm of life in the winter camp is unhurried but deliberate. Every movement is purposeful. Firewood is precious. Time is measured not by clocks, but by light and warmth and hunger. Outside the lodge, the world is still. Snow stretches across the plains like a white ocean, the sky a soft gray. The wind whistles faintly, tugging at the edge of your shelter. Somewhere in the near distance, a dog yelps, then goes quiet again. You rub your hands together. They feel dry, cracked perhaps, from days of gathering firewood or pulling rawhide straps tight. The winter is a test of patience more than strength. Days blur into each other. Tasks are repeated. Fetch water, patch robes, dry meat, watch the horizon. There's no real privacy here. Everyone knows your scent, your voice, your habits. But there's also no loneliness, not truly. There is always someone near, someone tending a fire, carving, sewing, or quietly telling stories in the dim morning light. Breakfast is simple. Dried buffalo meat, perhaps pounded with fat and berries into a mixture called wasna. It's not extravagant, but it is nourishing. Your hands are cold as you eat. The meat is chewy but familiar. You've tasted it through many seasons. Later, if you're assigned, you'll join others to gather more wood. The snow is deep in places, the trees are sparse here, and walking far in such weather is not done lightly. But you know where the windbreaks form. You know how to spot rabbit tracks. You know which branches will burn and which ones will only smoke. At night it's quieter still. You sit by the fire inside the lodge again, surrounded by flickering shadows. Someone speaks in a low voice. A story, maybe, or a memory of a hunt from seasons past. You hear the soft snip of scissors cutting through hide, the rhythmic rubbing of a stone over bone to shape a tool. You press your robe tighter around your shoulders. The smoke drifts upward, toward the smoke hole at the center of the roof. Sometimes it escapes, Sometimes it lingers and stings your eyes gently. The fire crackles, small but constant. Outside, the snow falls again. In the winter camp, everything is quiet effort. The rhythm of survival is one of repetition. Simple acts done with care, done again. And even though it is cold and often hard, there is peace here too. A slow collective breath held between the last storm and the next. So you settle back into your robe. The fire's glow reflects softly off the lodge walls. Someone stirs the coals. Another day is ending just as it began, in quietness, in patience, and in cold that never quite goes away. Now, as we stay curled within this winter world, let's linger a little longer in the small repeating details that make up each day. Because in this kind of life, it's not the big events that define your days. It's the patterns, the slow and steady rhythm of chores, customs, and care. The morning stretches on quietly. There's no clock telling you what to do next. But your body knows. Your hands know. Your people know. You check the fire again. It needs feeding. Just a few dry branches this time. Wood is precious here, and no one wastes even a twig. You fan the coals gently, and the flames blink back to life, low and flickering, like a sleepy eye just starting to open. Outside, the wind shifts. You hear it hiss softly across the plains, brushing against the lodge walls. The hide covering creaks just a little in the breeze. It's a familiar sound, like a sigh from the land itself. You pull your robe tighter and step outside for a moment. The cold hits differently now, not as a surprise but as a constant. Not cruel, not unbearable, just present, just there. You breathe, and your breath curls into the air like smoke. The sky above is pale, almost colorless, and the snow beneath your feet crunches with every step. That sound, croquet, you hear it dozens of times a day, but you never stop noticing it. Around you, other lodges sit in a wide, loose circle. Not too far apart, you want to be close enough to see your neighbors, to share warmth and labor, but not so close that the smoke from one fire fills another lodge. There's a careful balance to everything. Someone walks past wrapped in a fur robe, hood drawn up, arms tucked in. They nod at you, but no words are exchanged. Not because of unfriendliness, but because the morning doesn't ask for words. There's work to be done, and everyone already knows what it is. Do you feel that silence too? Not empty, just calm. The kind of silence that settles between people who know each other well. A shared quiet, a comfort in it. There's a small pile of firewood near your lodge, protected from snow under a hide flap. It's not much, but you know how to stretch it. The driest wood goes on first. The damp, greener pieces will be dried inside before they're burned. Everything is used carefully, patiently. Later in the day, you might help with water. That's never simple in winter. The river is frozen, of course. You'll walk out with others, maybe with a hide bucket or a clay pot, and use an antler pick to break through the ice. It takes time, it takes strength, but it's part of life here. The water beneath is clear and cold. You dip your vessel in and pull it out, watching tiny beads of ice begin to form along the edges almost immediately. Your fingers sting. You blow on them, shake them out, then tuck them under your robe for warmth as you walk back to camp. And what waits for you there? Maybe there's a pot warming over the fire now, the faint smell of stew in the air, bone broth, dried meat, perhaps a handful of dried wild turnip or some choke cherries from the last harvest season. Simple ingredients, but they nourish deeply. A slow, smoky flavor that lingers. Inside the lodge, the air is still heavy with wood smoke. You sit near the fire and eat slowly. There's no rush, no loud conversations, just the soft clink of a ladle against the side of the pot, the faint murmur of a story being told in another lodge, barely heard through the hide walls. Can you picture that? The firelight casting flickering shadows on the curved walls, the snow falling outside in complete silence, the sound of a child softly humming as they work a piece of sinew through a bit of hide, someone nearby carving a pipe stem, turning it gently in their hands. Time stretches out, soft and wide. The urgency of modern life is far away. There's only this: fire, snow, breath, warmth. In the afternoon, you help repair a pair of moccasins. The soles have worn thin from walking across frozen ground. You cut a fresh piece of tanned hide and stitch it carefully, looping the sinew through with a bone awl. Your stitches are slow, deliberate. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it does need to last. And as you work, someone nearby sings. Not loudly, just a soft, low melody, rising and falling like the wind. It might be an old hunting song, or a lullaby remembered from long ago. Have you ever noticed how songs feel different in the cold? How they hang in the air a little longer, echoing gently even inside your mind? There are no mirrors here, no reflections beyond the ice of a frozen pond or the polished surface of a still water pot. You don't think about your appearance the way modern people do. You think instead about your hands. Are they strong enough? Steady enough? About your boots. Are they patched properly? About the woodpile? Will it last through the week? These are the thoughts that fill your mind here. They are practical, grounded, but strangely soothing too. Each one belongs to a quiet task, and each task moves the day forward. Now the sun is low again. It never rose very high, really. Winter daylight is brief. Dusk comes early, wrapped in that soft kind of gray that feels like the world taking a long exhale. You step outside again, this time to check on the sled. It's a simple wooden frame lashed with rawhide, used to carry supplies over the snow. You inspect the bindings, still tight. You brush off some snow that's gathered on top, then run your hand along the smooth curve of the runners. You made these runners last winter, shaped them with a flint scraper, then steamed them over a fire to bend them just right. It took days, but now they glide effortlessly over the snow. Do you ever think about the satisfaction of using something you've made with your own hands? Not store-bought, not ordered, just crafted slowly from the land around you. It's a feeling that hums quietly beneath every chore in this world. Evening comes and the lodge glows faintly from within. The firelight flickers through the seams of the hide walls. Inside, people gather close. Some work still, carving, stitching, weaving. Others simply sit, legs crossed, arms wrapped in robes, watching the flames. A pot bubbles gently. Someone adds a pinch of dried herbs. The scent is sharp, earthy, comforting. You're not told to sleep. No one announces it. But the lodge quiets naturally. One by one, people lower their voices. Bodies shift beneath robes. The fire is banked. The smoke curls upward again, slower now. You curl beneath your own blanket. It smells of smoke, of hide, of warmth. You hear the wind outside, soft, persistent. Snow drifting quietly past the door flap. And in the dark, just before your eyes close, you think about the tasks waiting for tomorrow. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing new. Just wood to chop, water to gather, food to tend, stories to hear. It's a cold life, yes, but it's not lonely. You're surrounded, always, by quiet hands, quiet voices, quiet care, the kind of life that leaves room to think, to feel, to sleep deeply. Are you drifting now, just a little? If not, that's all right. We're not in a hurry here. History moves slowly, and so do we. Just rest a little longer in the lodge. The fire still glows softly, the snow still falls, and the winter just keeps on whispering. So you're still here in the lodge, still wrapped in your robe, still nestled close to the low, flickering warmth of the fire. Outside, the wind hasn't stopped. Not fully. It whispers and rattles now and then against the hide walls, tugging softly at the seams like a curious spirit. But the lodge holds strong, just as it has through many winters before this one, and many winters to come. And you're becoming part of it, aren't you? A little more at ease in the cold now, a little more attuned to its rhythm. It's a rhythm made of small things. And today, just like yesterday, is filled with them. You wake, not to an alarm, but to the subtle shifting of bodies beside you, family rising, stretching, murmuring. The fire is low again. It always is in the early morning. So you stir, pull your robe tighter, and move to coax the embers back to life. There's no rush. You're half awake, half dreaming. You move gently. Add thin slivers of wood first, careful not to smother the heat, then fan the coals with a twist of bark. The glow returns, faint at first, then brighter, then steady. Isn't it soothing? How even a small fire answers to care. The lodge begins to warm, if only a little. The walls still exhale the night's cold. Frost beads on the inner hide, glistening like tiny stars before melting into nothing. The world is still so quiet. The camp still blanketed in the soft hush of snow. You step outside again, and the air greets you with that same familiar bite. Not sharp anymore, not shocking, just firm, like the gentle nudge of an old friend reminding you to wrap up, to stay alert. The sky is that winter blue, washed out, pale, streaked with faint clouds. You see your own breath in the air, drifting lazily upward. Nearby, someone is tending their own fire. Another is shaking out a buffalo hide, brushing snow from its surface with long, sweeping strokes. Everyone knows what to do. No one hurries. But the day has begun. Today, you'll help process meat. It's cold work, but necessary, and oddly comforting in its repetition. A deer was brought in last night, not by you, but by someone in the band. A quiet, capable hunter who had been gone for 2 days. The deer was shared as always, and this morning you and others help with the work of preparing it. You kneel near a flat stone, hide beneath your knees, bone knife in hand. The meat is cold, stiff, but it yields to practiced cuts. Strips are sliced and laid out to dry on racks near the fire, where the smoke will help preserve them. The scent rises, earthy, thick, familiar. The air carries it, twining with the wood smoke and the chill. You glance up now and then, watching the children run past, their feet muffled in snow, laughter trailing behind like ribbons. They're wrapped in fur, their cheeks flushed red with cold, their eyes bright. Life continues. Do you feel how slow it all is? Not dragging, just measured, unbothered. Nobody counts minutes here. Time isn't kept in seconds. It's marked instead by the soft rhythms of survival. Chop, stir, stitch, shake, slice. The day deepens, and you're asked to help scrape a new hide. It's been soaking for days, softening in the icy water near the river. Now it's stretched between wooden stakes, pulled taut like the skin of a drum, and you work along the surface with your scraper, bone or antler, smooth and worn to your hand. The motion is steady. Push, draw, lift, over and over. And you lose yourself in it almost. The texture, the rhythm, the small pile of shavings curling away from the blade. Your hands move without thought, and it gives you time to think. Not the kind of thinking that rushes or buzzes, but the kind that wanders like wind across snow. The kind that notices small things, how the clouds have thickened since morning, how the dogs have gone quiet, how your breath now hangs closer to your chest. Have you ever had a task like that? One where your body works and your mind floats gently above it, like mist? It's not a bad feeling. You finish your part. The hide will become something useful. Maybe a new robe, maybe mittens for a child, or moccasins. You won't decide that now. That's for later. You return to the lodge. The fire greets you with a crackle. Someone is singing again, low and quiet. A song about snow, maybe, or about the hunt, or about someone long gone. The songs never need explanation. They just are. You sit near the fire, warming your hands. The flames play over the lines of your fingers, catching in the curve of your nails, painting them gold. Dinner is soon, simple again, but warm. Broth with marrow and bone. A few bits of dried vegetable rehydrated into something soft and soothing. You drink slowly. Let it fill you. No one eats fast here. There's time. Always time. Afterward, as the last of the light slips away behind the hills, you step outside again. The camp is dusky now. Smoke curls from the top of each lodge, rising into the sky like silent prayers. Snow crunches underfoot, but softer than this morning. The air is still heavy with cold. You find yourself looking at the stars. They're bright tonight, brighter than you remember. Sharp points of light scattered across the vast, dark bowl of sky. There's no light pollution here, no city buzz, no flicker of neon, just stars as far as you can see. And for a moment, you feel very small, but not alone. It's strange, isn't it? How looking at something so immense can make you feel cradled rather than lost. You draw your robe tighter and head back inside. Tonight the lodge is quieter than usual. A few people murmur, sharing quiet stories. A child is asleep already, curled up near the fire with a blanket pulled over their head like a tent. You lie down too. You pull the robe around you, you close your eyes, you think of the deer, of the hide you scraped, of the song you heard, you think of the stars. And then you think of nothing at all. Let's gently move into segment 2, where our story shifts from the shared rhythm of daily life to a quieter, more solitary path. Tonight, we'll walk beside a figure moving through the snow. A Lakota scout, someone who sees what others cannot, and who travels not for glory but out of duty, out of quiet, enduring trust. This will be a different kind of rhythm now. Not the rhythm of scraping hides or tending fires, but the hush of open prairie, the creak of leather, the breath behind a scarf of fur, the flick of a glance over a ridge, and the stillness that comes from listening, not just with the ears, but with the entire self. Let's begin. The wind has returned. And has, not harsh, not howling, just steady. A slow, unchanging current flowing across the white spread land. It brushes the tops of tall grasses buried beneath drifts. It slides through the bare branches of winter trees. It trails behind the hooded figure on horseback, riding west beneath a pale sky. That figure is our scout, not a war chief, not a leader of councils, not even someone whose name songs are written for. No, this is someone quieter, someone most at home out where the land goes on and on, with no sound but the wind and the breath of their horse. They ride light, no trailing robes, no feathers or paint. The clothing is warm, close-fitting, layered for silence. The horse's hooves are wrapped to muffle sound. The rifle is slung low. The bow is wrapped in hide. Everything is covered, dusted in snow. They have been gone from the camp for 2 nights already. No one needed to ask where they were headed. The elders simply nodded. A look was exchanged, and the scout rode out, disappearing into the blue shadowed horizon. Isn't there something about that kind of quiet trust that lingers with you? The world they ride through now is vast, white and breathing. Low hills rise and fall like frozen waves. Bare cottonwood trees stand in clusters near icy creeks. Rabbit tracks curve through the powder, winding in sudden bursts. Every so often the scout dismounts, crouching to study the prints. Not just for rabbits, not today. They're looking for other signs, faint impressions in the snow, a broken blade of grass, smoke too far from any known wintering camp. The land speaks softly for those who know how to hear it, and this scout, they have learned from their own kin, from older cousins, quiet uncles, a grandmother who once tracked her way home from a raid with only the stars and a broken sandal strap. Their teachings live on in each slow step, each glance to the west, each pause on a ridge, and always, always, in silence. That's something the scout carries like a second skin. Silence. Not just the absence of sound still, but a kind of presence. A choice to leave no mark, to walk like smoke, to pass like shadow. Do you know that kind of silence, the kind that isn't lonely, but whole? It's the same silence that fills this snowy prairie now, broken only by the creak of leather, the soft snort of the horse, the crunch of hooves on a frozen slope. The scout has seen something. They stop, slip from the saddle without a sound. They crouch low near the crest of a ridge, peering out over a valley below. There, just beyond the trees, faint, yes, smoke, rising slowly, steady and dark against the pale air. Not from their people. It's a small camp, hidden but not well. The scout stays low, motionless, watching, not for minutes, but hours, because time doesn't matter now, only detail does. The number of horses tied to the line, the position of the sentries, the way the snow is packed around each lodge, old or fresh. Are the dogs restless? Are the children laughing? Is this a war band or a family? It's the kind of looking that sees everything without staring. Eventually the scout withdraws. They do not act, because action is not the scout's role. Not here. They ride back the way they came, hooves muffled, scarf pulled higher against the cold. The sky is changing now. Hints of dusk feather the edges of the clouds. The air deepens into that cold that pinches the tips of fingers and numbs the cheeks. But the scout does not stop. They ride on through the dark, through the trees, through open prairie, and along frozen creek beds. The land knows them, and they know the land. There's something about riding at night, isn't there? Especially across snow. The way sound travels differently. The way the moon turns everything silver and strange. The way you can almost feel the world breathing beneath your feet, beneath your horse's hooves. The camp is not far now, just over the ridge. And when the scout returns, there is no fanfare. No one runs to greet them. No one shouts their name. They slip in quietly, tie their horse, and step into the warmth of the lodge. The fire crackles. The air is thick with smoke and meat and cedar. Eyes glance up, meet theirs. A nod, a gesture. Come, sit. They do, and in time, They speak, not in stories, not with drama, just quiet words. This many lodges, this many horses, north of the river bend, not on the move. One scout spotted, likely to stay a few more nights. No immediate threat, but close enough to watch. And then, silence. The lodge listens and decides. That is the scout's work. To see, to listen, to return, and to say what must be said. Isn't that oddly beautiful? To carry so much and speak so little. To know that your gift is not in shouting but in watching and in being trusted. Later that night, the scout sharpens their blade. It's quiet work, thoughtless almost. The stone hisses along the edge, a soft rhythmic whisper. They aren't thinking about glory. They're thinking about snow, about how fast it will fall tomorrow, whether the creek ice will hold, whether the other band will leave in the night. Their thoughts drift, like smoke curling toward the top of the lodge. And then, sleep comes. Let's pause here. Let the fire crackle. Let the snow drift down outside the lodge where the scout now sleeps, wrapped in quiet, in warmth, in purpose. And in the next part, we'll walk a little farther with them, perhaps even back out into the cold to see what else their world holds. Let's ease our way back into the hush of that snow-covered world, returning to our Lakota scout, who now stirs beneath the buffalo hide blankets, the low fire casting long shadows inside the lodge. In this second part of segment 2, we'll drift further into their quiet story, letting it unfold slowly like snowflakes gathering along a windless ridge. Settle in and let the stillness wrap around you again. The morning has a soft glow. The fire inside the lodge has dwindled to its embers. A few coals blink faintly beneath the ash, warm but fading. Outside, the snow rests lightly across the prairie, a thin new layer from the night, unbroken and untouched. Our scout stirs gently, not suddenly, not with urgency, but with that slow, practiced rhythm of someone who knows how to wake without sound. Their eyes open, stillness, breath. A hand reaches to brush snow from the edges of the lodge, pushing gently where it's gathered along the seams, just enough to let a sliver of light peek in, enough to read the shape of the world outside. Have you ever watched the light change slowly, minute by minute? How it creeps in quietly, unnoticed at first, until you suddenly realize, yes, it's morning? That's the kind of light that comes into the lodge now. The scout sits up, wraps the outer blanket tighter around their shoulders. Their hair, once braided, is loose from sleep. A few stray strands curl along their cheek. They brush them aside, absently. The camp is just beginning to stir. Somewhere, a child giggles in their sleep. A dog barks softly, then settles again. Across the clearing, someone adds wood to a fire, and the sharp scent of smoke drifts in on the cold. No one calls the scout's name. No one asks what they'll do today, because everyone already knows. This is their rhythm. After eating a bit of dried meat, a small piece of cold corn cake, they step outside, breathing in the air. It bites at first, of course. It always does. But after a moment, the body adjusts. The cold becomes a presence, not an enemy. The snow is crisp beneath their moccasins. Their feet leave narrow prints, barely indenting the fresh layer. They walk lightly, always. Even here, at home. Today is not a scouting day. Not far, anyway. But that doesn't mean they're idle. Instead, they walk the edge of the camp, eyes scanning. Not in fear, not even in suspicion. Just watching. Reading the subtle clues that others don't notice. Which horse limps slightly when it walks? Where the snow has settled unusually? Which children are playing too close to the creek edge? It's all part of the same quiet vigilance, the same patient care. Have you ever watched someone who notices everything, but says almost nothing? There's a calm to them, a kind of rootedness, like a tree that bends with the wind, but never forgets its shape. That's what our scout is like. Later in the day, they help mend a snowshoe. The frame has cracked slightly, and the rawhide lacing is loose in one corner. They sit by the fire, working slowly, their fingers moving with practiced ease. Around them, others chatter quietly. Stories are told. A child asks a question, someone laughs. The scout says little, but they're listening. Always listening. And when someone jokes about the cracked snowshoe, that maybe it broke because they were too clumsy, our scout only smiles, not quite meeting the eye of the speaker. They don't need to reply, because those who know already know. You see, that snowshoe broke during their last trip out, when they climbed a ridge too steep, too icy, just to get a better view of the valley where smoke was rising. It cracked on the way down, but the scout never said a word. Instead, they walked the rest of the day with a limp, adjusted the straps and kept going. That's the thing about quiet people, isn't it? Sometimes they carry more than you realize. By late afternoon, the sky begins to shift again. Pale blue deepens toward gray. Wind picks up. Not strong, just steady. Enough to send flurries tumbling across the open ground. The scout pauses at the edge of the trees, one hand resting lightly on the trunk of a narrow pine. They tilt their head, eyes narrowed. There's a change coming. The wind is different. It smells faintly of wet bark, frozen earth, and something else, something unfamiliar. They stay there for several minutes, not moving, just sensing. And then, without a word, they turn back to the camp. Their pace quickens, but just slightly. Nothing hurried, nothing panicked. Inside the lodge, they crouch near the fire and murmur something to the elder seated there. A nod, then another. And quietly, without alarm, the word begins to pass. Just enough to be ready. Just in case. Perhaps the snow will thicken. Perhaps a visitor will arrive. Perhaps nothing at all. But the scout has felt something shift. Have you ever had that sense? That something is just around the bend, even if you can't quite name it? It's not fear, not even worry. Just a sense. That night, our scout does not sleep as soundly. They sit by the fire longer than usual, sharpening a bone knife, then rechecking the bowstring, not obsessively, just with care, with readiness. The fire crackles softly. Outside, the wind hums, and above them, the stars begin to blur behind thin clouds. The next morning, there are tracks. Not far, along the ridge just east of the creek bed, faint but real. The scout crouches beside them, narrow prints, single file, a set of 3. Boots, not moccasins, one slightly dragging, possibly a limp, possibly just tired. They follow, but not close. They do not want to be seen. Instead, they loop wide, taking a path through the trees, circling downwind, watching, waiting. and eventually they see them. 3 men, strangers, not from any nearby camp, wrapped in thick furs carrying supplies, tired, moving slowly, not hiding, but not announcing themselves either. The scout watches for a long time. They make no sound. Then, quietly, they retreat. Because again, their role is not confrontation. It's to know, to return, to report. And so, they ride. The air is sharper now, the snow heavier. But they ride with the same even rhythm, the same calm. That night, after speaking with the elders, the scout sits quietly again near the fire, and someone asks them softly why they do it, why they always go, why they walk into the cold, into the wind, into the unknown, when others stay by the fire. The scout only shrugs. There's no speech prepared, no story, but after a moment they say something simple. Because someone has to see. And that's all. Not because of glory, not because of greatness, but because someone must carry the stillness, the listening, the care. And they too were called. Let's rest here a moment. Let the scout sleep. Let the wind rise and fall again across the prairie. Let the snow pile gently on the lodge roof. Let the dogs curl into themselves and the coals glow red beneath the ash, because in the quiet, someone is watching. And because of that, the others can sleep. Just like you, maybe, right now. Are your eyes starting to grow heavy? Or maybe you're already lying down, blankets tucked around your shoulders, the room dim and warm. You're safe here, just as the scout has made their people safe. And in our next segment, we'll turn to another kind of story. One buried beneath the snow, tucked under cairns, waiting in the bones of history. So now the sun has sunk low again, as it always does, behind the gently rolling hills of the Great Plains. The colors it leaves behind are never quite the same, but always familiar. Lavender, copper, and soft gray melting into one another like brush strokes across the endless dome of the sky. Our scout, still unnamed, because out here names are private things kept close like warm robes, stands atop a stony ridge. The horizon is vast and uninterrupted, except for a few scraggly trees far off to the south, and the distant silhouettes of buffalo herds, moving slow, shaggy, and purposeful across the land. Have you ever stood so still that the cold seemed to pass right through you, becoming part of your breath, your clothes, even your thoughts? That's the kind of stillness our scout has learned. A stillness that lets the world move around you without noticing you're there. He's been watching the valley below since the sky was still pale with morning frost. He hasn't said a word, not even to himself. For a scout, speech is for after, for storytelling, for moments around the fire when the work is done. Out here, silence is its own kind of wisdom. Now let's follow him again, shall we? Low. The wind this evening carries a sharper edge than the one from yesterday. There's a whisper of snow in it, a scent more than a sight. Maybe you've smelled that kind of air before. That clean, expectant smell that tells you something is coming. Maybe soon, maybe not, but the wind knows before we do, and knows. Our scout adjusts the strip of hide around his shoulders, tugging it tighter at the neck. The cloak is lined with rabbit fur, soft and dense, and the wind snags at the fringe like fingers. His eyes are tired but alert. He hasn't slept much, not in the way you and I think of sleep. Out here, rest comes in slivers. A nap behind a boulder, a pause beneath a tree's frozen shadow. You learn to rest in pieces. Can you imagine that? Sleeping not by the clock, but by the movements of the wind or the way the sun glints off distant ice. It's a different rhythm altogether. Below him, the valley is mostly quiet. A creek runs through it, half iced over, making small sounds that resemble soft speech, a babble, a murmur. There are deer tracks near the edge. He saw them earlier, saw how they paused, turned, and then vanished into the willow brush. But it's not deer he watches for now. He's watching for trails that don't belong, marks that run too straight, too wide, smoke that rises in the wrong pattern. Even birds can reveal a secret if you know how to look. The sudden hush of a flock, the alarm of a lone magpie, those are things a scout listens for. That's the language of the land, and he's fluent in it. And here's something worth pondering quietly, if you're still awake. What would it feel like to know a landscape not just as a backdrop, but as a living companion? To be so attuned that even the sky feels like part of a conversation. Our scout shifts his weight slowly, just enough to ease the pressure on one knee. His muscles hum with the ache of holding still, of cold seeping into joints and fingers. But there's no complaint, no thought of comfort. The comfort, after all, is in knowing that the village, his people, sleep safe because he stands watch. In the world you and I live in, it's easy to forget how much care can live in quiet acts. But here out on the rim of winter, every footstep matters. Every gaze, every choice to wait or move or breathe shallowly. The clouds are beginning to gather now, dim and streaked across the twilight. A good time to move, perhaps. He descends the ridge with that same careful grace we've seen before. Feet light, knees bent, every motion quiet as falling snow. No broken twigs, no clatter of gear, just the crunch of soft crust under hide-wrapped feet. He makes his way along a ridgeline path, shielded by stone outcroppings and low brush, always keeping the wind in his favor. He moves like someone whose shadow doesn't follow, silent, slight, and deliberate. There's a particular patch of earth he wants to check, a place where two trails cross, just south of a low pine. Some days back, he'd noticed a scatter of broken reeds there. Stepped on, he thought, but not by elk. Too sharp, too flat. It might be nothing, but scouts don't ignore might be. They trust the murmur of doubt. When he reaches the place, the sky is already veiled in that deep pre-night blue. Not full dark, but the color just before, when everything becomes softer and the world seems to whisper. There are tracks here, faint, but not invisible. 4 sets, older than a day, but not by much. He crouches, fingers hovering just above the prints. One of the trails curves oddly. The gait is uneven. He presses 2 fingers to the ground. The soil beneath the snow is still firm, cold, and dry. The prints were made when the frost had already set in. He memorizes them, not just the shape, but the story they tell. Then he stands slowly and scans the distant tree line. You might be wondering, does he feel fear out here? That prickling sense we get when we walk alone at night? The short answer is, not quite in the way you and I do. Fear isn't loud for him. It's quieter than breath. It lives in the gut, not the chest. It doesn't rush him, it steadies him, it's part of the rhythm. He won't return to camp just yet. Not until he's certain. He circles the clearing once more, wide and slow, marking subtle paths and taking note of where snow has melted thinner. These are things passed down through teaching, yes, but also through repetition, through living it day by day, year by year. And now, as we linger in this quiet moment of solitary vigilance, maybe you find yourself wondering, what would you notice if you stood this still for an hour? What might the world whisper to you if you simply listened? Eventually, when the stars are just beginning to poke through the night sky and the horizon to the west fades into blue-black velvet, he begins his return. The path back to the village isn't marked. There are no signposts or lanterns, but he knows the way. His feet know it. His breath falls into its rhythm. And as he moves, there's a small hum in his throat. A half song, not really for music, but more for pace. A way to keep time with the wind and the night birds. The village will be quiet when he arrives. Fires banked low, shapes curled beneath hides, the sound of children's soft dreams and the occasional shifting of a sleeping dog. He'll speak only to the elders first, in low tones, by the fire. He'll describe what he saw where the prince led, what the wind told him, and then he'll sleep curled near the edge of the lodge, fur drawn high, thoughts fading into the gentle flicker of the firelight. And you, dear listener, perhaps you too are growing drowsy now, feeling the weight of your own body, the warmth of your blanket, the hush of the world around you. There's more to this story, more waiting just ahead. But for now, rest your eyes if you like. Let the scout keep watch for both of us. Now that we've wandered through the quiet footpaths of daily life in the winter camp, and followed a solitary scout through his cold, deliberate watch over the plains, let's turn our gaze to something even more still. Still, but not lifeless. Still, but waiting. Let's imagine, if you will. The snow has long since melted. The campfires have gone out. The people have moved on, many winters ago, their footsteps erased by wind and time. And now, what remains? This is where we slow down even further, dear listener. This is the quietest part of our journey, a journey of fragments, whispers, and signs left behind. Archaeologists, those patient listeners of the earth, walk these plains with trained eyes and quiet reverence. They are not looking for treasure, not for gold. What they search for is something softer, a sliver of bone, a patch of discolored soil, a single stone out of place. Have you ever wandered through a field and thought, someone might have stood right here hundreds of years ago? Maybe they paused, just like you. Maybe they were cold or hungry. Maybe they laughed. Maybe they simply looked up at the sky. And so begins this part of our story, with an old prairie long emptied of the people who once called it home, and yet full of stories still buried just beneath the surface. Let's kneel now beside one of these stories, quietly, carefully. A field of short grass sways with the wind. At first there's nothing unusual about it. But if you walk slowly, scanning every rise and dip in the terrain, you might notice a low mound, almost like a bump in the land's skin. Not tall, maybe the size of a sleeping dog. It's just grass-covered earth, but it's also a cairn, a burial of sorts, though not always for people. Sometimes these cairns contain buffalo bones, sometimes tools, sometimes a woven mat or fragments of old hide, now mostly turned to dust. These small hidden mounds were markers. They were caches, intentional deposits made with care and purpose. a way of storing things for the future, perhaps for another winter, perhaps for someone else entirely. Isn't it comforting in a way to think of people planning for a return they weren't sure would ever come? These caches speak to resilience, to a life that wasn't just about surviving the now, but gently preparing for later. What might have been tucked away inside? A bone awl carefully carved, a packet of dried berries wrapped in hide, a sinew cord, twisted tight and coiled like a sleeping snake. Each item, humble but precious. And when these things are unearthed today, it's as if the past is taking a quiet breath. Nothing flashy, just a soft exhale of memory. Have you ever held something very old in your hands? Something that once belonged to someone else, someone long gone? There's a certain hush in those moments, isn't there? Now let's shift just a bit further, still in the prairie but looking for different signs. Bone tools are among the most telling clues of life on the plains. They don't shine like metal. They don't glint like glass. But they last, sometimes better than wood or even cloth. Carved from buffalo ribs, elk antler, or even bird bones, these tools were once the extensions of someone's hands. A hide scraper, its edge smoothed from use. A sewing needle, delicate and light as a pine needle, but made from bone. A flesher, used to clean hides, its notches worn down by countless repetitions. Tools like these tell us about the rhythm of the days, about work done by firelight, about the creak of hide being stretched, and the quiet song someone might hum while stitching together a winter coat. In archaeological digs, these bone tools are sometimes found clustered together, tucked beneath a hearth, or inside the outline of what was once a lodge. The earth remembers where the walls once stood, even when the lodge itself is long gone. Changes in soil, differences in texture, they form the ghost of a structure, a memory of shelter. And within those outlines, archaeologists sometimes find not just tools, but small stones, scorched and blackened from the fire they once surrounded. These are hearthstones, some cracked from heat, others still carrying traces of ash after centuries, and maybe a little charred seed or two, charred just enough to be preserved. Would you have guessed that a burnt goosefoot seed, no bigger than a grain of sand, might someday tell us what people were cooking hundreds of years ago? That's the kind of soft wonder that archaeology gives us. A slow unfolding, a listening. Let's pause for a moment here and picture an archaeologist kneeling in the field, the wind ruffling their coat, gloves dusty, a small trowel in hand. They scrape gently at the soil, brushing away layer by layer, like peeling back time. And then the curved tip of a rib bone appears, not from an animal buried naturally, but one shaped by human hands. A tool. The archaeologist doesn't speak, just leans closer, brushes the dirt with a soft bristled brush, lifts it, cradling it in their palm. The tool may be hundreds of years old, but for a brief moment, it is warm again, just from the touch of another person. And somewhere out across the prairie, the wind keeps blowing, indifferent, steady. Now, let's move to a different kind of sight. Stone circles. Maybe you've seen pictures of them. Flat stones arranged in rings on the ground. They look simple, almost accidental, but they are anything but. These are tippy rings, the stones that once held down the edges of buffalo hide lodges. When the camp moved on, the stones remained, anchors left behind. Sometimes you'll find many of these rings in a single area, whole encampments mapped by stone. Can you picture it? A place that today is open and silent, once filled with smoke from fires, the quiet clatter of tools, the laughter of children. And now, only these gentle rings remain. Each one speaks of a family, each one a shelter. The size and placement of the rings tell us about how people arranged their communities. Some circles were larger, housing several people, others smaller, some close together, others set apart, perhaps for a particular purpose, maybe the lodge of a healer or a couple with a newborn. Isn't it soothing in a way to imagine that people once chose where to place their home, based on sun, wind, kinship, and memory? The archaeological story isn't told with loud declarations. It's a whisper, a murmur, a finger tracing lines in the soil. It's the slow puzzle of fitting together the past with only fragments. But through those fragments, something rich and human emerges. We also find buffalo jump sites, cliffs where buffalo were once driven by coordinated human effort, their falls cushioned by the earth but final nonetheless. At the base of these jumps, deep layers of bone. But not just chaos. There is order here. You'll find butchering tools, fire pits, even pathways worn smooth by movement. This wasn't just the site of a hunt. It was a site of community labor, of survival, of rituals and stories shared over the remains of a great effort. And yes, archaeologists even find evidence of how bones were processed, crushed for marrow, boiled for grease, shaped into tools or ornaments. Have you ever thought about how much a single buffalo provided? Hide for shelter and clothing, meat for food, sinew for thread, bones for tools, even hooves for glue. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, of how nothing was wasted, how survival was an art of completeness. We might also find rock art, petroglyphs or pictographs carved or painted on stone faces, often worn by time, faded by sun and wind, but still visible if you look just right, at the right time of day, when the light is soft and low. These images aren't always easy to interpret. They're not labels, they're not explanations, they're expressions, perhaps of dreams, of hunts, of visions. In a way, they're like lullabies in stone, songs that never needed to be sung aloud. And so, as we slowly explore this third chapter in our journey, what we find is silence, yes, but also fullness. A past not forgotten but sleeping. A past that surfaces only when we're quiet enough to listen. And maybe, dear listener, you're listening in the dark right now, wrapped in a blanket, the soft hum of your room around you. Maybe there's a breeze outside, or a distant night sound. And somewhere across time another person, long gone, once sat beside a fire, stitching a seam, warming a bowl of broth, listening to wind too, different lives, different winters, but maybe not so different after all. Wouldn't it be nice to think that time folds softly like that sometimes? That someone long ago also paused to look at the stars and felt very small but very peaceful. Let's rest here for a little while, in that quiet fold between then and now. When you're ready, we'll continue. We still have more stories to explore, soft ones layered with snow and sleep and memory. But there's no rush. Take your time. When we last left off, We were standing quietly near the low mounds of stones, those wind-worn cairns, each one tucked gently into the earth like a memory someone meant never to forget. Cairns weren't just markers. Sometimes they pointed the way. Sometimes they covered something precious, and sometimes they simply held a story, buried under time and snow. Now let's follow that quiet story a little deeper. Not far from one of these cairns, archaeologists once found a ring of stones laid out in a perfect circle, just large enough to hold the base of a teepee. Long gone, of course, but the stones remained. Anchors for the edges of the lodge. They'd once held the buffalo hides taut against the prairie wind. And the wind here, well, it never really rests, does it? Imagine crouching down beside those stones, cold to the touch, weathered, silent, but still holding the shape of a home. Have you ever touched something and felt time ripple beneath your fingers? Like it's not just an object, but a little door into someone else's life. That stone ring told them more than just someone lived here. It told them how big the lodge was, how it faced, how the smoke hole would have been centered just so, letting the rising warmth escape and draw in new air. You can almost picture it again, can't you? The soft flap of hide in the breeze, the flicker of firelight casting long golden shadows on fur-lined walls. And scattered nearby there were tools, shaped bone, smoothed antler, scrapers, awls, and tiny sharp-edged bits that once belonged to a flint knapper's skilled hands. One tool in particular, it was made from a deer's rib, carved down, polished smooth, and shaped into a gentle curve, likely used for hide working. A simple tool, but holding it, someone might feel how many hours of labor it represented. How many hides softened by fire, scraped clean, smoked and stretched until they were soft as cloth. All done by hand, quiet work, focused, rhythmic. Can you picture it? Someone seated on a low rock, legs tucked in close, moving the rib bone in smooth arcs across the stretched hide, back and forth, over and over, the soft rasp of bone on skin, the occasional crackle of the fire nearby, maybe a soft voice singing to themselves, or the low chatter of children at play just out of sight, and all of that from one tool in the dirt. That's the thing about archaeology. It's like listening to a whisper carried on the wind. The loud parts of history, those don't survive so well out here. But the quiet parts, the daily rituals, the repetitive motions, the objects shaped by careful hands, they linger, just barely. So let's wander a little farther together, shall we? Just beyond the old campsite, there's a gentle rise in the land. Nothing dramatic, just a slope that catches a bit more sun, especially in winter. And tucked into the side of it, there's something curious. Small pits in the earth, almost invisible unless the light hits just right. These were once storage pits, dug down into the frozen soil, then lined with bark or grass, and sometimes even sealed with clay. Inside, preserved food, dried meat, fat mixed with berries, tools, even seeds, all placed carefully inside and covered, sometimes with flat stones or sod. These weren't just pantries, they were promises. A promise that the people here would return, a belief that tomorrow or next season or the next snowfall, someone would dig here again. That survival wasn't just about today, but about trust in continuity. Trust in the land, the rhythm, the memory of where things were hidden. It's kind of comforting, don't you think? That someone knelt down long ago in the cold and tucked away food for the future. not knowing exactly what would come, but believing that someone, maybe their child, maybe their sibling, maybe even someone yet unborn, would need it. Have you ever stashed something away just in case? Maybe something small, a note, a keepsake, a bit of comfort for your future self? There's something very human in that. These pits, though quiet and humble, speak volumes. They tell us that planning ahead was survival, that food wasn't just eaten, it was processed, smoked, packed, stored, and remembered. And in those moments when storms came early, or the buffalo moved too soon, those little caches in the ground may have meant the difference between hunger and hope. And speaking of buffalo, let's talk about bones. Out on the open plain, archaeologists have sometimes found massive, sprawling bone beds. Not the scattered remains of random animals, but concentrated deposits. Piles of ribs, vertebrae, skulls, all resting together, sometimes layered in neat, almost methodical rows. These are buffalo kill sites. There's one in particular at a place called Head Smashed In, an evocative name and yes, just a little grim. But we'll tread lightly here, gently. This was a buffalo jump used for thousands of years. People would guide the herd toward a cliff using subtle cues, lines of stone, shouts, waving hides, steering the animals toward the edge. And then, the leap. The result was food for an entire community. Bones, hides, sinew, fat, nothing wasted. And in the sediment below the cliff, archaeologists found the remains, layer upon layer, a deep, almost sacred record of meals, tools, and labor. They also found fragments of tools, knives and scrapers, many broken from use, right there at the processing site. The work was hard, but it was also communal. Everyone had a part. And again, the bone tells the story. You can see where the cut marks are, where tendons were removed, where marrow was extracted. This wasn't chaos. It was organization. Deep knowledge passed down, generation to generation. There's something deeply moving about that, isn't there? That long before written language, these people carried knowledge not in books, but in their hands, in the motions they passed on, from one winter to the next, from one child to another. Can you imagine being taught not with words, but with movement? Your grandmother places a bone in your hands, shows you where to press, where to scrape. You copy, you try, you fail, you try again, until eventually it becomes part of you, like breath, like rhythm. And now, centuries later, a stranger lifts that same bone from the earth and wonders, who held this? Who learned by doing? What was their name? Sometimes buried deep beneath the soil, archaeologists also find things more unexpected. A pendant carved from bone, maybe, or a tiny bead of shell far from any ocean, carried here by trade, or a small carved figure, its meaning unclear but clearly made with care. These are the moments where archaeology becomes something more like poetry, where a person's hands echo across time and space, not through grand monuments or loud declarations, but through the quiet act of crafting something beautiful, just because. And when these little objects are found, the dig slows down, voices get softer. There's a reverence that settles over the site, not because the object is fancy, but because it's intimate, personal, a glimpse into someone's inner world. It makes you wonder, what would someone think if they found something of yours 1,000 years from now? What would they learn from it? Would they know what mattered to you? And now, As the wind continues to move over the plains, let's pause again near another stone ring. This one slightly larger, the stones more sunken, the circle less defined. Time has softened its edges, but still, it holds its place. In the center, archaeologists found something curious. A depression in the earth, darker than the rest. This was once a hearth. And inside? Charcoal, fragments of burned bone, a few cracked stones, likely heated and placed into water to boil it. You can almost feel the warmth still lingering there, can't you? Picture it. A circle of people seated close. Cold air outside, but inside, a glow. The smell of smoke. A slow-cooked stew bubbling softly in a pot. Maybe there's laughter. Maybe silence. Maybe just the occasional murmur as someone tells a story, long and winding, handed down like a thread tying them all together. It's these small echoes, this hidden warmth, that archaeology listens for. It's not always about finding something grand. Often it's about sitting very still, observing, noticing, letting the land speak slowly because the land remembers, the stones remember, the bones remember. And now I wonder, are your eyes getting a little heavier? Maybe you can feel the quiet pull of sleep gently brushing at your thoughts. Or maybe you're still with me here, walking softly across the frosted earth, listening to the whispers of the past. Either way, we've uncovered a lot together, haven't we? And in just a moment, we'll take another gentle step forward toward the flicker of firelight, not in a winter lodge, but around the council fires. Toward the stories of those who led, who ruled, and who carried the pride of their people in silence and ceremony. But before we do, maybe take one slow, full breath. In and out. Let the stillness settle. Let the stories sit quietly beside you, like old friends keeping watch through the night. We'll continue very soon. No need to hurry. We're exactly where we need to be. And so, as we find ourselves still wandering through this quiet landscape of time, we drift a little further into the world of the northern plains, and into the small, silent traces left behind by those who lived here long before we ever arrived. The snow may have melted from the high grasses by now, and spring might be teasing the edge of the wind, but for our purposes tonight, let's stay tucked within the hush of winter. A soft, grey hush, where the past feels closer than usual, where the wind curls low and slow over the earth, and where everything, the camps, the tools, the hands that shaped them, all begin to whisper again, if you listen long enough. In this part of our journey, we're going to explore a little more of the archaeological side of things, the things that last, the quiet things, the objects and traces that survive long after stories are lost and memories fade. After the smoke from the fires is gone and the snow has covered every track, have you ever thought about how much of history is pieced together from silence, not from words, but from stone and bone and buried fragments of living? These aren't loud pieces of evidence, they don't shout. They sit patiently in the ground, waiting for careful hands and quiet minds to notice them. So let's imagine we're with one of those quiet minds now. A slow, thoughtful archaeologist, perhaps, gently dusting back a layer of earth on the northern plains. Let's say it's early morning. The sun's just brushing against the frost-bitten grasslands. The sky is pale and clear, and there's that thin crunch beneath your boots as you walk. Not much around you, Maybe a distant cluster of cottonwoods by a frozen stream. Maybe just the wind coasting softly over an old rise in the earth. But there, just beneath your feet, somewhere not obvious at all, is something that doesn't quite belong to now. Maybe it's a scatter of bison bones, not in the usual way you'd expect from an animal that passed naturally. No, these are marked, cleaned, arranged, maybe split in ways that tell of marrow extraction, of use, of knowledge. And that's the first hint. A conversation opening up between you and someone who lived hundreds, maybe thousands of years before you. Can you feel that? It's not dramatic, not cinematic, just deeply quiet, like a personal letter hidden in the soil. Now, over the last few decades, researchers and native communities working together have uncovered thousands of such quiet letters across the plains. The stories vary, but again and again, they remind us of the deep ingenuity of life in these climates and the tender connection people had with the land, the animals, and the seasons. One particularly moving example, though not a flashy one, is the use of cairns and rock alignments. Have you heard of these before? They're simple on the surface, just rocks arranged purposefully in the landscape. Some are circular, some are V-shaped, others form long, narrow lines that stretch out over hillsides. But these weren't random. They were buffalo drive lines. Picture it, hunters guiding herds subtly, patiently toward a kill zone. Maybe a hidden cliff, maybe a narrow gully, maybe the flat prairie between two rises, all of it choreographed with patience, coordination, and an intimate understanding of animal behavior. But after the hunt, the stones stayed behind. That's what archaeologists find now. The lines half buried, the cairns softened by time, and if you're still enough, you can almost feel the energy that once moved through them. The pounding hooves, the low calls of the hunters, the flapping of hides in the cold air. And then silence again. Just rocks, just bones. But to those who know how to read them, especially elders, oral historians, and tribal archaeologists, they speak volumes. There's a phrase used often in indigenous archaeology: the land remembers. Isn't that beautiful? Not just poetic, but practical. The land carries memory, through soil chemistry, through erosion patterns, through hidden hearths and post holes and bone pits, through tools made of flaked stone, nestled into stream banks, through the shape of a hilltop where teepees once stood, again and again every winter for generations. And one of the most haunting yet tender finds across these winter sites, the small smooth tools, the ones shaped for sewing, scrapers, awls, bone needles. They're not dramatic finds usually, but oh, the lives they represent. They belong to hands that worked by firelight, hands that softened hides, stitched robes, repaired tents, and made moccasins for growing feet. These were the tools of caretakers, of parents, of quiet labor in the cold. And the bone they're made from? Often bison. Again and again the buffalo appears not just in food or fuel or clothing, but in every corner of life. A kind of presence, lingering in the bones left behind. Do you ever wonder what it must have felt like to work by that flickering light, to press a needle through thick, softened hide while the wind tapped gently at the lodge outside? There's something so tactile about it, so real, even now. And then there are the fire pits. Another quiet kind of memory. Some archaeologists have found deeply buried hearths in layers of prairie soil, fireplaces blackened with charcoal and grease, sometimes with tiny charred bones or seeds, or bits of broken pottery nearby. It's such a cozy image, isn't it? Even though the pit is long cold now, you can almost feel the warmth that once radiated from it. The low crackle, the soft voices around it, maybe a lullaby, maybe a story, maybe just the silence of shared presence. And the food? Sometimes those seeds are wild plum pits, sometimes they're goosefoot or sunflower. Once in a while, charred kernels of maize traded in from far-off gardens to the south, but always, always traces of care. These hearths, like everything else we've been quietly visiting tonight, remind us that winter on the plains wasn't just about survival. It was about rhythm, about balance, about tending and watching and passing along the knowledge of how to live in a place so vast, so open, so achingly cold, and yet still full of life. Do you find yourself imagining the people now? Maybe not in sharp detail, but more like a warm shadow of presence. Someone bundling up a child in furs. Someone smoothing a hide across a wooden frame. Someone rising early to check the meat stores while breath clouds drift softly in the air. Archaeology can't capture feelings exactly, but it gestures toward them. It gives us the outlines and lets our own imaginations step softly into the gaps. And perhaps that's part of what makes this kind of history so soothing, so restful. It's not about grand battles or loud declarations. It's about the quiet layers of living, the way people shaped their days, the sound of snow beneath a sled, the touch of a carved bone tool in a gloved hand. All of it simple, and all of it somehow sacred. Now, before we drift too far tonight, let's pause for a moment on a particular kind of object that often goes overlooked in big museum displays, yet has such a calm presence in the archaeological record: the gaming pieces. Yes, and games, even in winter. Even during long cold nights in the tent, people played. Children, adults, everyone. Some of these pieces are carved from bone, others from antler or smoothed pebbles, sometimes little discs, sometimes figurines, sometimes just bundles of sticks marked for tossing. One game, a kind of dice game, used split buffalo rib bones tossed in a shallow dish of hide. The way they landed determined the score. Sometimes it was just for fun. Sometimes it was for storytelling. Sometimes it may have had ceremonial meaning. Isn't that lovely to think about? Even when the wind howled outside and the cold crept in beneath the tent flaps, people laughed, people competed, teased, challenged one another. There was play alongside all that hard work. And these small fragments, tucked into ancient debris pits or buried beneath collapsed lodges, remind us they didn't just endure the winters, they lived them. Fully, thoughtfully, softly. So much of what we know from these archaeological finds has been made richer through collaboration with native communities today. Tribal elders bring oral history, stories passed down through generations, teachings about how things were done, not just what was done, but why and how and what it meant. And through that gentle weaving between the physical traces and the living memory, we get something closer to truth, or at least a quieter, rounder kind of understanding. We see that life on the plains wasn't monolithic. It wasn't one unchanging way of living, but a fluid, responsive relationship with a landscape that could be both harsh and generous. And it reminds us maybe of something a little deeper. Something about how all of us in our own way leave traces behind, not always in stone or bone or ash, but in gestures, in the way we care for each other, in the warmth we offer, even on the coldest nights. That's the kind of memory that doesn't need a museum. It lives on in stories, in quiet moments like this one, in stillness. Do you ever wonder what traces of your own life might remain long after you're gone? Not in a heavy way, just softly. A cup placed just so on a shelf. A path worn gently in the grass. A favorite phrase passed down like a lullaby. It's comforting in a way to think we're all part of that bigger rhythm. And with that thought, let's stay quiet for a moment. Let the fire of the past burn low. Let the snowy wind outside the camp fade to a hush. Because in our next segment, we'll be stepping just a little higher in the camp, where the council fires burn, where the elite warriors sit in ceremonial regalia, where codes of honor are kept, and the rhythm of power plays softly beneath the snow. But for now, just rest here, among the stones, among the bones, among the tools made by hands you almost remember. The land remembers, and you're welcome here. Tonight, our quiet journey drifts into a different kind of winter stillness. A place where decisions were whispered over embers, where honor sat heavy in the air like snowfall, and where some lives were shaped not by the chill of wind, but by the weight of responsibility. Welcome to the fourth and final segment of our evening together. If you're still with me, curled up perhaps beneath a warm blanket, eyes a little heavier now, then you're right where you're meant to be. Here we'll leave behind the scraping flint tools, the hunting trails, the worn leather moccasins pounding through snow. We'll step instead into the quiet halls of thought, though not halls made of stone or wood, but of open sky and glowing firelight. These are the spaces where the leaders of a people met, not with ceremony for ceremony's sake, but with a deeper rhythm, one rooted in balance and mutual respect. Tonight, we visit the council fires of the Plains peoples, specifically the Lakota. But what we speak of was shared in spirit by many nations across the northern interior of what's now North America. Picture a ring of people, seated or standing, their heavy robes pulled close against the crisp night. The wind may stir gently at the edges of the gathering, but it is hushed now, out of respect, or so it might seem. In the center, the fire burns low and steady, casting that familiar amber light we've come to know across this journey. Faces glow in profile, features flickering with every breath of flame. The voices here are not raised. Decisions are not shouted over one another. Instead, the rhythm of speech follows the same patient pulse as the land they come from. This is the council, the place where elders, respected warriors, and chosen speakers deliberate over matters large and small. And though the decisions may guide hundreds, even thousands of lives, the tone remains calm, the movement thoughtful. Have you ever sat in stillness, watching how firelight dances along wood grain? How shadows stretch and collapse with each flicker? That's the pace here. Deliberate, reflective. Entire evenings might pass in gentle conversation before a single decision is made. Because to lead was not to dominate, it was to listen, to hold the stories and needs of others, and to return with an answer that honored them all. And who were these leaders? Well, among the Lakota, leadership wasn't something seized or granted through inheritance. There were no crowns, no thrones, no gilded robes. Instead, a person became a leader through quiet accumulation of wisdom, generosity, bravery, and humility. A warrior might be recognized not simply for triumph in battle, but for what they gave back afterward. Someone who had captured horses or led raids might earn praise, yes, but the one who gave their horses away to those in need, who protected the camp, who spoke gently and acted decisively, these were the ones others began to follow. Imagine that for a moment. What might our world feel like if status came not from what you owned, but from what you gave away? Not from how loudly you spoke, but from how well you listened. And among these quiet, steady figures stood the elite warriors, those often called the shirt wearers. They were chosen from among the bravest, the wisest, the most respected of the band. The title came from the sacred shirts they were gifted, elaborate garments decorated with quill work, with human hair locks representing sacred responsibilities, not trophies. These warriors were more than fighters. They were protectors, mediators, examples. Their role wasn't just about strength, it was about restraint. In fact, some of the most revered figures in Plains culture were those who acted with patience, those who could endure insult without striking, those who could offer their food before taking a bite, those who stepped in to resolve tension rather than escalate it. These were the virtues that formed the foundation of elite status: quiet strength, steady judgment, a sense of timing as sure as the seasons. Sometimes at these council fires, decisions would be made that carried the weight of movement. Should the camp migrate? Should there be a hunt, a war party, or peace talks? And always, these decisions had to be made with consideration for every person in the band. The children, the elders, those too frail to travel, those newly recovering from illness or injury. Consensus, rather than coercion, was the path. Often, it took longer, but that was never seen as a flaw. Time was not an enemy, and around the edges of these circles, young ones might listen, learning not just from what was said, but how it was said. They would watch how their elders held silence, how they waited for the right moment to speak, how they considered all sides. Lessons absorbed like snow absorbs footfalls, quietly, deeply, without rush. Can you remember a time when you learned just by watching? Perhaps by sitting in a room and listening to grown-ups talk. It's a different kind of knowledge, isn't it? One that settles into the bones, slowly, gently. And so the tribal elite were not cloaked in opulence. Their power was subtle. It rested in their reputation, their history, their steadiness. There were feasts, yes. There were ceremonies and dances and songs passed down that held meaning only known by a few. But even these were not loud declarations. They were quiet affirmations. Some were adornments of meaning, eagle feathers for bravery, beadwork rich with family stories, bone necklaces carved with symbols. But these were not about vanity. Each decoration had a context, a lineage. Often it was less a statement of "look at me," and more a reminder of where they had come from, who they carried in their memory, and what they must uphold. Let's pause here for a moment. Close your eyes if they aren't already closed. Can you imagine the kind of society where the most honored people were the ones who listened best, where leadership meant carrying others, not climbing over them? It's a different rhythm, isn't it? One that doesn't move with urgency, but with presence. We'll sit here a little longer by the council fire. There's more to explore. More quiet currents of tradition, more subtle textures of leadership to feel in your palms. But we'll let this moment settle in first. When you're ready, we'll continue together. Let's stay with the council fires just a little longer, shall we? Imagine the soft flicker still lighting those strong, lined faces, the elders, the chiefs, the respected warriors who had earned their seat not with wealth or inheritance, but with years of walking, watching, deciding, and protecting. Each person here speaks in turn, slowly, with pauses that stretch like the horizon. They do not interrupt one another. They do not raise their voices. Even disagreement is offered with care, as if words are being chosen not just for the people in the room, but for the memory of those who came before, and those who will one day sit in their place. Their language, often poetic and filled with metaphor, might sound different from what we're used to today. A man may say, "There are heavy clouds over the valley," when what he means is that danger is coming. Or, "The buffalo stand far off," when he speaks of hunger on the horizon. This way of speaking wasn't just beautiful, it was deliberate, a way to slow thought down, to be sure of meaning. And nearby, just outside the lodge, you might find the younger ones waiting. They listen, not just with ears, but with their whole posture. Their eyes absorb everything, the tilt of a head, the hush of respect when an elder clears his throat. Leadership, after all, was a kind of stewardship. It wasn't about giving orders. It was about carrying the weight of your people's future, their safety, their spirit. And in many ways, the burden was shared. Do you ever think about how different leadership looks across time and place? How sometimes the greatest strength isn't about commanding, but about listening. In this world, consensus matters more than control. A chief who tried to rule harshly without the consent of the people would simply find himself speaking to empty air. There were no prisons here, no written laws, but there were deeply embedded customs, almost invisible in their strength. Tethers of trust, expectation, and mutual responsibility. Even warriors, those held in the highest esteem, didn't live above the laws of tradition. They were admired, yes, but with admiration came accountability. A warrior who acted selfishly or failed to uphold the quiet honor expected of him might lose not just his standing but his voice in the council. And to be unheard, in a society where speech was sacred, where community was everything, well, that was a kind of exile all its own. And so codes emerged. They weren't written in ink or etched in stone, but they were no less binding. Codes of conduct, of respect, of when to speak and when to listen, when to go to war and when to wait. Sometimes these unspoken rules would show themselves during sacred gatherings, ceremonies that blended the spiritual with the social, where storytelling, dancing, drumming, and gifting all carried meaning far deeper than surface appearances. Imagine the hush of the audience as a gifted orator rises, his voice soft at first like wind brushing over snow. His story, perhaps, is one passed down from his grandfather, a tale of a hunt that went wrong but was made right by courage and sacrifice, or a fable of a fox that outwitted a storm. The children lean in. The elders smile, not because the story is new, but because it is old, trusted, polished by many winters. And the warriors, those sitting just outside the ring of light, listen too, not with arrogance, but with reverence, because in this world, being a warrior meant far more than fighting. It meant protecting. It meant understanding when not to raise your hand. It meant knowing when to return quietly, and place your bow beside the fire. Have you ever considered how courage can look like silence? How strength can mean stepping back instead of forward? Among the Lakota and others across the northern plains, there were warrior societies, groups within the larger group, organized, respected, and bound by unique codes. The Kit Fox Society, for instance, or the Kante Tinza, the Brave Hearts. These were not exclusive clubs of violence. They were in many ways moral anchors. They enforced decisions made by the council. They acted as ceremonial guards. They reminded the people, especially the young men, of what it meant to live with honor. Their regalia, simple, sometimes elaborate, was never for display alone. Each feather earned, each sash worn, carried a meaning, a memory, a responsibility. A sash might be dragged on the ground during battle, and the warrior who bore it would not retreat unless someone else pulled it free. That was the depth of resolve expected. And yet, between all these stories of strength and status, there was a quiet undercurrent of humility. Chiefs might be given many gifts, but they were expected to give them away. A great warrior might lead a hunt, but the meat was shared equally, especially with the elderly, the widowed, the sick. Imagine that for a moment. What if generosity was the mark of greatness, not possession? In these winter camps, generosity wasn't just encouraged, it was essential. During difficult winters, it could mean the difference between life and death for someone in the lodge next door. The value placed on interdependence shaped everything, from the food people ate, to the way they raised their children, to the way they remembered those who passed. Stories were never owned. Songs were shared. Names were passed down like warm blankets. And in this rhythm, the tribal elite, those held in the highest regard, were not the ones who demanded respect, but the ones who quietly earned it. So perhaps we can pause here once more and breathe in the calm of that idea. That status wasn't loud. That honor didn't need shouting. That leadership meant presence, not pressure. Can you feel the difference that makes? Maybe it's something we all crave in our own way. A world where strength is quiet, where power doesn't press down but lifts others up. As the wind dances once more across the edge of the village, carrying with it the low hum of a song passed from lodge to lodge, we'll carry this thought into the final part of our story, where legacy, ceremony, and the hush of long memory linger like embers beneath snow. Shall we step into that next? And now here we are. The fire has burned low, just the embers left now, flickering like distant stars beneath a heavy winter sky. This is the final stretch of our journey together through the rhythms and rituals of a world long past. One more quiet walk through the frosted hush of the northern plains, and we'll end where all long nights end, in reflection, in rest, in the warm safety of dreams. We've lingered long in the realm of daily life, in the solitude of scouts, in the whispers of bones and buried tools. And now, we finish among those whose voices shaped entire seasons. The leaders, the council speakers, the warriors and vision keepers of the tribe, the ones whose words carried weight not just in battle, but by the fire under the stars and deep in the silent hearts of those who followed. But leadership in this world was not about loud commands or crowns. There were no thrones, no golden scepters, no armies marching under flags. Instead, imagine influence that grew slowly, like a tree, rooted in honor, in patience, in how one lived. Among many northern plains peoples, like the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Mandan, the Hidatsa, and others, status wasn't something simply inherited. It was something proven, earned, day after day, hunt after hunt, winter after winter. There were councils, yes, groups of elder men and respected leaders who would meet to discuss matters of movement, diplomacy, ritual, and judgment. Their gathering spaces weren't carved from marble. They were circles on the earth, under boughs, or within the warmth of the largest teepees. The wind outside hushed by layers of hide and snow. Inside, it would be dim, lit only by flickering firelight, faces caught in warm and shifting amber. Can you picture them there, listening more than speaking? Smoke curling softly around braids, a long pause before each response. One person speaks, and everyone listens, deeply, not just to the words, but to the weight behind them, the years, the steadiness. Leadership came with humility, with generosity. To be called a chief or to speak with authority was not about shouting louder than others. It was about having lived in such a way that others chose to follow. Imagine a warrior who, when the hunt was over and food was scarce, gave away his portion to an elder, or to a widow, or to a child with thin arms, not once, but again and again. That quiet generosity, seen and remembered, would whisper more loudly than any speech ever could. This is how status formed, not through conquest, but through consistency, through care. Of course, there were warrior societies as well. You might find it interesting that many plains cultures divided their strongest fighters into groups, not just for combat, but for ceremony, for social balance, and for discipline. These were not roving bands of chaos. These were coded, organized, often spiritual in purpose. Among the Lakota, for instance, groups like the Kit Fox Society or the Bolance Society played vital roles in both battle and community life. They upheld moral codes, enforced rules, protected camps, and led dances and rites. Can you imagine standing outside a circle of dancers during a long ceremony, watching members of a warrior society move in perfect rhythm, feathers swaying gently, bells whispering from ankles, the deep sound of drums echoing through your chest? It's not a war cry, it's a memory, a pulse, a story told in steps. In many societies, the highest honor was to be brave in a very specific way, to count coup. That meant not simply killing an enemy, but touching them in battle, coming close, showing courage by risking your life without taking another's, and then turning away, not to humiliate, but to prove. Courage, mastery, discipline. That moment would be remembered, retold around the fires, and recorded, not in books, but in quill work, beadwork, painted robes, or in the songs of storytellers. You see, there was something sacred about restraint. And at the top of these layers of earned honor stood the peace chiefs, often older men, sometimes former warriors, sometimes visionaries, men whose dreams were taken seriously, interpreted not as superstition, but as signposts. Dreams, vision quests, the long solitude of fasting in the wilderness. These weren't private hobbies. They were vital, cultural acts. If a man dreamt of thunderbirds or wolves or stars, it meant something. And if he lived his life with honor, others would listen. The spiritual and the political were never far apart. And yet, despite all this structure, things remained flexible. Councils could shift, honor could fade, others could rise. There were no fixed castes, no locked-in dynasties. Each winter tested old leaders. Each hunt revealed new ones. Leadership then was like the fire, bright when fed, but always in need of tending. Do you ever think about the people in your life who've led not by command but by example? Who've never asked for attention, but somehow always have yours? Out on the plains, this kind of quiet leadership was everywhere. In the hand that helped others up, in the back that bent beneath a burden not their own, in the voice that chose silence over shouting. Over time, such patterns became power. And so among the elite of these societies there was pride, yes, but not arrogance. There was ritual, but not rigidity. And always, there was the awareness that winter could come for anyone, regardless of title. Even a leader must tend their fire. Even a chief must listen to the wind, and now the stars are high overhead. The snow has settled like a great hush over the land. Fires dim, voices fade. You've made it all the way here to the end of the journey. Through the biting cold, the drifting smoke, the quiet footprints of scouts and the soft hum of mystery below the earth. This world, once full of movement and meaning, now sleeps beneath time. But for a little while tonight, you were there. And maybe in some small way, a part of it is still with you. A rhythm, a calm, a warmth. Thank you for walking these slow, snow-covered steps with me. Sleep well now, let the wind settle. Let the night carry you. Good night.